Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever in the world you are. My name is Mark Swanson. I'm the IT storyteller with the NetApp on NetApp program. And our monthly webinar today, we are joined by NetApp IT Senior Cloud Architect, Matt Norton. And he is going to talk about Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP. And we'll be taking questions. So if you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the chat and we'll get to them after the end of the formal presentation. And with that, Matt, I will turn it over to you.
All righty, thank you, Mark. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see that, Mark?
We got it.
All right, so as Mark said, I'm Matt Norton. I'm a senior cloud architect with NetApp IT. I've been with the company for about 14 years now. All of that time has been spent in IT, so I've done a number of infrastructure things. Currently, my focus is on cloud, and that's not just public cloud, but really hybrid cloud, sort of building and hosting what we call Cloud One, which is a self-branded name for our hybrid cloud portal internally, which allows people to provision resources, VMs, load balancers, that sort of thing, and storage. Don't forget storage, to either on-prem or hyperscalers, Amazon and Azure specifically. And so obviously we have an interest in a good use case for FSx ONTAP. So today we'll talk about how NetApp IT is using FSx ONTAP, what we like, what we don't like, some of the pros and cons, especially against other products, earlier products like CVO or Cloud Volumes ONTAP. I will mention, I don't know what the official name for FSx ONTAP is. Lately, I've heard FSxN. I think we started with FSxO. I've got FSx ONTAP here, so if I say FSx, I'm probably referring to FSx ONTAP. Just keep that in mind. Also keep in mind, FSx is technically a generic service from Amazon. There's FSx for Windows, FSx OpenZFS, I believe, and a couple others. So ONTAP is one of 3 or 4 under that FSx umbrella. A quick look at the agenda. We'll talk about what FSx is. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I mean, I think most of you know it's ONTAP, but software defined, virtual. We'll talk about NetApp IT's approach for application storage, kind of where we started a few years back with that Cloud One hybrid cloud model, and where we are now. We'll talk about hyperscaler native versus best of breed tools. We'll talk about some of the benefits for IT, and then also some of the drawbacks. It's a short list, but there are some that you may consider. And then we'll talk about cost. So what is FSx ONTAP? So all of the things that ONTAP is, it's just that you don't own it, basically. To further punch that home, the way I like to think about it, because people ask, is it a brand new product? And it sort of is, but this is the way I like to think about it. It is essentially a customized version of Cloud Volumes ONTAP, but with a big fat ribbon on top. And what I mean by that is that, NetApp and Amazon AWS engineers have worked together for some time to really make it, a full first-party Amazon service. To have the Amazon CLI and API available, as well as ONTAP CLI and API, to make it as easy as possible for people to get up and running and to maintain. So that's really the way I like to think about it, because previously within IT we were using CVO, and when FSx was announced, I was sort of like, well, what is this thing? I had no idea, and eventually I find out that it is based off a CVO image, heavily customized, and a lot of surrounding engineering has been done, but at its core, it is based off CVO. So this is a simple timeline of NetApp IT's journey within our Cloud One hybrid cloud portal for our application storage, right? So we started in 2019 with NPS, and some of you may not know what NPS is. That's NetApp Private Storage. So this is basically a plain hardware filer like you may have in your data center that's co-located in an Equinix data center, very close to an Amazon data center. So it's basically a hardware filer, and that's where we started and have been really for most of this time. And then in 2021 we moved to CVO. The cost of maintaining hardware inside that Equinix colo, the network equipment, the storage equipment, that became a little more than what we wanted to deal with. We didn't have people in the data center. It's Equinix data center, so made some things a little bit challenging. So we thought to move over to CVO. Unbeknownst to me, FSx ONTAP was right around the corner, which I think dropped in September 2021. It was announced to us at an IT all hands internally. I had no idea it was coming, so it kind of caught us off guard a little bit. But during that all hands, one of my managers actually messaged me and said, "Hey, try this thing out. It's available now in the console." So I did. While I was still in the all hands, I jumped over to the Amazon console and was able to get it up and running with hosting storage, an NFS mount on a Linux VM to the storage, all within 30 to 40 minutes. So I was very impressed. Things you may have heard of that we're not currently using within our Cloud One hybrid cloud. Not to say we don't use them, because we do, but within Cloud One infrastructure as a service, we're not currently using Azure NetApp Files or CVS, which is just plain cloud volumes. So one of the questions we always face for a variety of towers, right? Storage or network security and so on, is, do we take the tools that we use on-prem for years? And the example I like to give is F5 for load balancer. We used F5 for a very long time on-prem, and the first thought when we tried to extend into the public cloud in Amazon specifically, we thought, well, let's take the virtual F5 appliance, and most vendors will have a virtual software-defined version of whatever widget they sell, right? Whether it's F5 or Palo Alto or NetApp, everyone has a virtual equivalent that you can deploy in the public cloud. And there are some advantages to doing that, certainly. And as I said, that's where we kind of started, was taking what we knew and putting that into the public cloud. And so some of the advantages you get with those sort of best of breed incumbent type solutions is generally you get better features in tech, right? So, F5 is the 800-pound gorilla of load balancing. There's a million things that you can do in F5 that you cannot do in an ELB. The feature parity is just not there. So generally there's more stuff you can do. The other part, and this was maybe the biggest one, because in our case, we're going to extend to multiple hyperscalers, Amazon plus Azure, maybe eventually even Google. That's very difficult to maintain that automation, because everyone is different. But if you're using a third-party solution that's available in all of those clouds, then you can code once for the most part. That's not 100% true, but it's 90% true. So, if you're coding for F5 in Amazon, it's not going to be a whole lot different than F5 on-prem or F5 in Azure, and so on. You can sort of code once and simplify your life. It's also the devil, right? So if it's something you've used for years on-prem, you know how it works, you know who the support folks are, you know how to get answers. There's no new training necessary to simply move from a hardware version to a virtual version. And finally, you can leverage existing processes and integrations you may have with other systems, right? So you may have external automation. You can keep that stuff. You don't have to reinvent the wheel for any dependent systems. And then there's native, right? So native certainly has its own advantages. Typically, it's going to scale better, right? It's native to your hyperscaler, so you can get it up and running very quickly across a multitude of regions. Going back to the F5 example, and this is true for many marketplace solutions, you sort of have to do it region by region, right? Because it's not native. If you're deployed in US East 1 and a developer comes and says, hey, yeah, that's cool, but I want to do it in US West. Well, you have to do the same thing again, right? You have to go to US West and go to the marketplace and deploy one or two if you want HA, sort of set up all the networking. It's not built in. With native, you typically have better integration, right? So, for example, with ELBs, they obviously integrate with EC2. That integration is not going to be there for something like F5. You typically have better programmatic access, and this is something we've seen also for the hyperscalers, right? And that could be in the form of CLI or Ansible modules or something like Terraform. Typically, those things are very bug-free. They're well-tread, well-worn. A lot of people use them, a lot of customers for the hyperscaler, and they tend to work quite well. I've seen, with F5 specifically on-prem, there were some bugs. There were some things that did not work with the Ansible module specifically, I'm referring to. They did not work quite as intended, and it caused some problems. You find these bugs, and waiting for the vendor to fix them is often not an option because that could take months or longer. But with Amazon, again, it's a lot of people use it, so it tends to be of a better quality. Native will typically be cheaper. That's how they compete, and they can afford to be cheaper. And then, of course, the chargeback, right? So with a lot of things moving to public cloud, the ability to charge back is gaining steam across many IT orgs. And if it's a hyperscaler service, most likely you already have some type of billing process for your hyperscaler in place, and availing a particular service like FSX or ELB, it's all going to come into your monthly Amazon bill. So that's again a decision that we normally have to make for load balancing and for firewalls and network devices and so on. But with FSX ONTAP, you don't have to make that decision anymore because you get both. You get a best of breed solution in ONTAP, right? And it's now a native service within the FSX umbrella. So you're getting everything under the rainbow here. You get all of the advantages of both. So it's really, for us, a very exciting solution. And thus far, our experience has been quite good. So some of the benefits, there are many, but these are important to us. The scale up, so the ability to deploy to multiple regions. So with CVO, it was kind of new. It's not something that we were doing for a long time, but I can tell you from experience that getting it set up and running, it usually took 2 to 3 weeks. And that was because we're talking, my team, the cloud team is talking to the network team, talking to the storage team. Everyone has their part to play. and the back and forth communication, it takes time. And then often things are sometimes missed, and you go back to sort of dot the I's and cross the T's. It takes time. But with FSX, it's literally, it's 30 minutes. You click a few things and you can be up and running in 30 minutes. And you can do that in any region that you want to do. You don't have to sort of rubber stamp it. Now you might say, well, you could automate that, right? You could automate deploying CVO to multiple regions. And that's true. You could do that. But that takes time. That takes personnel that are skilled enough to make that happen. And that's sort of the point, right? Of a product, of any product. You don't want to have to do that stuff. You're paying a vendor to give you, a package, a piece of software, whatever, that's well polished. It's got the big ribbon. It's ready to go, so that you don't have to do all that stuff. And so FSX does that. We have found, and we'll talk about this later in the presentation, because I think it's of big interest to everybody, is the cost. We have found that it is actually quite cheap to run FSX. We've done cost comparison with CVO. We've even done cost comparisons with MPS, the old hardware solution. And really, FSX is not just a little bit cheaper, but it's a lot cheaper. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. The performance is great. There's a quote here from one of our storage folks that talks about some of the under the covers stuff that FSX ONTAP is using for reads. They're using caching, in-memory caching, and NVMe drives in the Amazon hypervisor that makes the reads super fast. They're using the new IO2 block express EBS type, and of course Amazon has their own custom network stack to Nitro, scalable, reliable, datagram. Say that 3 times fast. So we've done a lot of testing with a bunch of different tools, with FIO, SIO, you name it. We've benchmarked it, and we found the performance to be very good. High IOPS, you're getting what you pay for. You can scale the IOPS with the throughput. It's sub millisecond latencies until you get up to very high queue depths. It's very good performance. The other one is, and this kind of comes down to cost also, but there's 3 basic knobs you can turn with respect to performance, and that's your SSD capacity. How much SSD capacity do you have? There's throughput, the network throughput, and then there's your provisioned IOPS. And when FSX first dropped, the only one you could change after the fact, actually, I don't think you could change any of them after the fact. That's changed now. So even after the initial provision, you can change the throughput and the provisioned IOPS to match your needs, right? So you don't need to start high and then wait for your workload to catch up, because you're just wasting money, right? If you select 512 megs of throughput, but you only need 256, you're wasting money. So you would want to drop it down. And FSX now gives you the ability to do all those things day 2 after the initial provision. So you're really only paying for what you need, what you're consuming. And then finally, and depending on who you are, this may be the biggest advantage of all, is that you don't manage it, right? So you're no longer concerned with the hardware down, right? So you're not dealing with aggregates and RAID groups. You're not dealing with upgrading ONTAP. Amazon will do that for you. You can set a maintenance window as to when they must do that. So you're out of that game. You don't have to deal with that anymore. So potential drawbacks. So double-edged sword, right? So the first bullet is you don't control the ONTAP release. Amazon does. So that's true, right? So if you're a company maybe that has external processes and hooks into ONTAP, let's just say you've got an administrative script that that talks to ONTAP via the API or CLI, whatever, and does something, right? And if it happens to be dependent on a specific ONTAP version, you no longer control that with FSX, right? With CVO, you do. You can upgrade whenever you choose or not. But with FSX, Amazon is going to do that when they can, right? So when a version comes out and they've been through their QA testing, they're going to roll it out, and so that can cause problems. It's not bleeding edge. It's not the absolute latest as soon as it drops, but it's fairly close, I think. It's not too far back from what's available. So, good and bad. They're going to keep it up for you, but if you have complex external dependencies, it could potentially be a problem. The other thing that the second bullet here, I didn't really think about this honestly until we really got our feet wet with CVO, is that it's unlike many services in the public cloud. There's two control planes. There's the Amazon CLI API, and then there's the ONTAP CLI and API. So obviously, the ONTAP CLI and API has more stuff that you can tweak and configure. The Amazon stuff is really a subset of that, right? So most things you will do in ONTAP, but some things, bread and butter things like creating a volume, those things you can do in Amazon or you can do in ONTAP. And generally what we have found thus far is if you can do it in both, do it in one, and that one is Amazon. So if you can do it, if you can create a volume in both places, and you can, then do it in Amazon. I won't go into too much detail, but the Amazon is sort of a wrapper and does some things, for example, with respect to backups, if you've enabled backups on your volumes, that ONTAP alone is not going to do because it doesn't know, right? So just keep that in mind. If you have high security sensitivities, maybe you're a government or something like that, you may not be comfortable with your data ultimately sitting in someone else's data center, because that's what it is. Now, technically, encryption is enabled by default at rest. You can also encrypt over the network, so all those features are there, but technically that data is not in your data center. And for some folks, that may be an issue. And then another one that a lot of times people don't think about is data transfer charges, right? So if you go to the FSX ONTAP calculator, there's a lot of stuff you can tweak. There's nothing in there about data transfer charges. So if with any public cloud service, if you don't sort of architect things well, and let's say you have a lot of inter-region traffic that you did not expect, well, you're going to pay for that. I forget what the price is. I wouldn't say that it's high, but if you don't plan accordingly, you may be paying more than you would otherwise expect, just based on the FSX file system itself. So keep that in mind. You want to limit inter-region traffic as much as possible. Keep it within a region, and you'll be just fine. So let's talk about the cost. Sort of what makes up the cost of FSX ONTAP within Amazon. So the first thing is it a single AZ or multi-AZ? And when FSX first came out, it was only multi-AZ. They've recently added single AZ as well. So with multi-AZ, all the data is replicated, right? You've got an active and a passive node, an HA pair in ONTAP terms. And the data from AZ1 is always replicated to AZ2. So if AZ1 were to go away, then AZ2 automatically takes over, and you don't lose any data. It's all there. But obviously, it's double the data, right? So the cost is roughly double for multi-AZ versus single AZ. And single AZ is probably a good fit for subprod stuff. So your dev, your test, your stage, where you may not necessarily care that you could potentially lose it, although even the likelihood of losing a single AZ is also quite low. So single AZ might be a good fit for subprod stuff. For prod, you probably want multi-AZ, although you could argue that if you've got backups, that is sufficient even for prod. But you can save a lot of money with single AZ if you can get away with that. Then there's the SSD capacity. So this is your primary storage, and I put here that it's in terms of public cloud costs, you want things to be consumed, right? You want it to be based off what you consume, not what you allocate. So that way you're not overpaying, right? So the SSD capacity, it is allocated technically, but it is adjustable, as I mentioned earlier. So if you're starting off with FSx ONTAP, you don't want to just start with like 20 terabytes. You can start with 1 or 2, and as you use that storage, you can then go back and increase it. And so that's ideal from a product perspective, right? You're not wasting a bunch of money. You can allocate only what you need to use. I think for the capacity, you have to go up in increments of 10% or more is the minimum, but I think that's pretty reasonable. Similarly, the network throughput. So this is the throughput that you can drive to a given FSx ONTAP file system is also allocated but adjustable, and that scales from I think 128 meg to 2 gig per second currently. Initially there were only 3 options, but they've added a couple more. Again, allocated but adjustable to exactly what you need. It also integrates with CloudWatch, so you can easily see the throughput, the capacity that you're actually using at any given time, historically, whatever. It's easy to tell what you use and where you need to go. The provisioned IOPS, by default, you get 3 IOPS per gig for free. Anything more, you have to pay a little bit more. And I find that the 3 IOPS per gig is actually pretty good once you start scaling up that SSD capacity. Then your provisioned IOPS goes up with it. They're sort of locked together. Again, this is allocated but adjustable. Oh, I'm sorry. I haven't updated the slide. I missed it. This is not yet adjustable. This is adjustable now. It took a few months after debut, but all of these things are adjustable now. So the next tier, other than the SSD capacity, your fast storage, is what Amazon calls the capacity pool. So the capacity pool, you won't find this in the Amazon documentation, but it's S3. I don't know if it's S3 standard S3 or S3 IA infrequent access. I'm not sure, but by nature S3 is consumed, right? It's not allocated. So if you've configured your volumes to be auto, right, it will tier stuff. I think 30 days if it's not if a given block, right, whether it's NFS or iSCSI, if a given block is not used, then it will be tiered to the capacity pool. The capacity pool is, as you might expect, it's cheaper than the SSD storage, and again, that's all consumed, which is ideal. And then there's backups, which are optional. You can configure a scheduled backup for all of your volumes, or you can do manual backups per volume, however you would like to do it. And again, that's going to S3, and so it is also a consumed cost. So you can see this for yourself. On the next slide, I'm going to show you some of the numbers that we have for comparing CVO versus FSx ONTAP, but I also included the links to the calculators. The first one is Amazon's FSx calculator, and the second one is NetApp's calculator for CVO. So the numbers I'm going to show you might say, okay, well that's nice, but is that what I would pay? Well, maybe not exactly, but you can go to the calculator yourself and put in your numbers, and you can see that FSx ONTAP will be much cheaper for you, just like it is for me. So this is a little comparison. I know it's a lot of colors that are hard to tell apart. We've got from left to right here, We've got NPS, which again is the old, it's ONTAP hardware filer in a co-location center. And then with the lighter blue and the yellow, we have FSx ONTAP. So that's these two right here. That's FSx ONTAP. These are all multi-AZ. So, it's double the storage. Again, if this was single AZ, which could be an option for you, it would be half of what these actually are. So this is, in that respect, kind of a worst case scenario. I've also got optimistic here in the light blue versus less optimistic in the yellow. So what that means is how much storage is deduplicated or compressed or compacted. And that's all, of course, based on your specific data. It's going to vary between people. Yours will not be the same as mine. I think Amazon by default shows like 65%, and that's the optimistic here. And then for the less optimistic, I can't remember what I put. I made it significantly less optimistic in terms of how much you can save from data efficiency technologies. And so that's why the yellow one is higher than the blue one, right? Because the yellow one is consuming more SSD storage and less capacity pool storage. And then there's some other solutions here, standard cloud volumes, CVO. So CVO is the rest. And keep in mind, these are discounted because I also am a NetApp customer like you, but my discounts are better. These are actually discounted numbers for CVO. CVO single node with cloud backup, CVO HA, and then HA with backup. So you can see some bars are longer than others. The CVO is quite a bit more expensive than FSx. But again, don't take my word for it. You can pop on over to those calculators and put in your own numbers, and you'll see the same thing. You're going to see that FSx ONTAP is quite a bit cheaper. It's cheaper, it's easier to set up. You don't own it, so in my opinion, it's a slam dunk all around. So that's what I had. Mark, if you want to open it up for questions.
Yeah, we had a initial question from Joe. He said your first slide mentioned petabyte scale data sets in a single namespace. Does this mean that FSx in using flex group volumes by default?
Yeah, I think it's got one file system will scale up to, I think, 192 terabytes. I actually was looking at earlier. Yeah, 192. Does this mean that FSx is using flex group volumes by default? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. Was there something a more specific question around the flex group that you had, Joe?
Scale out NAS using C DASes.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know what that means. I'm not a storage guy. I don't know what that means. Scale out.
Use cases.
Okay, yeah. I was like, what's a CDAS? I'm missing something. Yeah, so this would be the limit per file system, right? And a file system is only going to be up to 2 nodes. If you need to scale out beyond this, I'm fairly certain that these limits will be raised. I almost certainly that will happen sooner rather than later. But if you scaled up to 192 terabytes, for example, and you could not go higher, then you would deploy a new file system instance, right? It's not like cluster mode on-prem, right, where you can have a cluster with a number of HA pairs. It's 2 nodes per file system, which is kind of a confusing naming, but that's how it is. So if you need to scale out beyond the limits of a given file system that you see here, then you would be provisioning a new file system.
Okay. And Michael is asking, I believe this was in relation to the cost slide. Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was asking about the required transit gateway.
There is not a required transit gateway. Um, what do you mean by that exactly?
Uh,
There is nothing required in terms of the transit gateway.
um, just for my own question, how is like security and backup handled on this? Is this all on the Amazon side?
Yeah, so you can configure backups. They're optional. You can configure a scheduled backup, and that's through Amazon. Or you can do a per volume through Amazon also. And I believe there are probably a number of NetApp ways to do it also via Cloud Manager. So the options are there. You can also set default snapshot schedules like you can on-prem. That's not a backup. That's a snapshot, but for the most part, anything that you can do in ONTAP, 98% you can do with FSx ONTAP. There's a few things, especially with regard to permission, RBAC permissions within ONTAP that are a little bit different, that may be off limits. So customers don't shoot themselves in the foot. But for the most part, feature-wise, if you can do it in ONTAP, you can do it in FSxN.
I guess also just for my own knowledge, what's the user experience like? Is this like exactly like working in traditional ONTAP, or how's that work?
Yeah, it is. So you can do a lot of things through the Amazon console.
Mhm.
You can also do a number of things through a NetApp Cloud Manager. So my team, for example, we're working on migrating workloads from NPS and CBO into FSx. We're going all FSx for Amazon. So we're going into Cloud Manager, and you can provision volumes. You can do NFS export policies. We're using it to do snap mirrors. So you can sort of drag and drop your systems. If you have multiple FSx file systems, you can put those all in Cloud Manager. It's really just providing your credentials, and then you can set up your snap mirrors through the UI, to move data from A to B. So, and then of course you can still SSH into ONTAP as FSx admin. That's the admin user that Amazon creates when a file system is set up. So you can SSH in and use the ONTAP command line that you're used to. There is no system manager for FSx, at least not at this time. So other than Cloud Manager, there isn't really a NetApp GUI for FSxN, but I have a feeling that probably might change in the future. But there is no system manager. If your admins are used to system manager, that's not available yet for FSxN.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I think we are at a point of finality here. Thank you, Matt. This was really fantastic.
Yeah, no problem.
For everyone on the webinar, we'll be sending out a recording and the slide deck later today, so be on the lookout for that. And we will be back next month. And I hope to see everyone then. Thank you so much for coming.